These were intellectuals talking in a very practical sense about what we are going through. One of those intellectuals is the founder of PayPal and Palantir, Peter Thiel. He also founded the Thiel Foundation, which supports science and technology, as well as long-term thinking. I'd never seen Thiel speak before, but I will try to condense his speech because I found it highly practical and analytical. His topic was the big tech curse. He opened by saying that tech has been almost the sole font of American capital formation for decades, a gold rush of sorts. However, this is a narrow cone of progress. The non-tech capital has been in companies such as Exxon, Walmart, Costco, and banks. Tech made California rich. If you look at the world's largest economies, the list goes like this. Number 1, the United States, 2, China, 3, Japan, 4, Germany, 5, California. But in being the world's 5th largest economy, California has 2 major parasites, Thiel says. The first is the public sector. There is a 53% premium in public sector workers over private sector workers. So government jobs earn 53% more than private sector employees do. That's a huge differential. The second parasite, he says, is education. In a set of slides, Thiel quotes the 16th century French philosopher Jean Bodin, who said, quote, "Men of a fat and fertile soil are most commonly effeminate and cowards, whereas contrariwise, a barren country makes men temperate by necessity and by consequence careful, vigilant, and industrious," unquote. To translate this, it means that resource-rich countries are usually slothful and wasteful. Case in point, California. Thiel argued that real estate in California ran into limits, so something had to be replaced. And that something ended up being the middle class. The U.S. median household income in 2020 was $67,000. In California, it was $78,000, Texas almost $64,000, and in Florida $57,000. But ranked for cost of living, California was 3rd highest cost of living, Florida 24th, and Texas 36th. Thiel argues that this indicates that California is a dysfunctional resource state. He then compared California to Saudi Arabia, since both places have significant resources, but wokeism in California is equivalent to Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia. In this tongue-in-cheek way, he makes the point that wokeism is the state religion of California. Of course, we know how bad the homelessness situation is in California as well. So, in being a misguided resource state, it flushed out the middle class, leaving only the ultra-rich, some of whom ended up leaving, like Elon Musk, and the uber poor, who stayed behind for all the government subsidies and freebies. Thiel then turned his attention to the political climate, because he funds a number of Republican candidates, especially in the 2022 elections. He argues that the dysfunctional resource state, California, has a lock on Democrat politics. Gavin Newsom seems to be primed to make a presidential run. And of course, Kamala Harris, the vice president from California, also wants it, but is extremely disliked across the board. He talked about how the California ideology is embracing a Club of Rome theory. The highly globalist Club of Rome report was a warning of imminent environmental disaster that promoted a no-growth policy that curtails growth in more developed countries and societies. How do they achieve this? Well, it's very intentional. Thiel argues that gender reassignment, gender transitions, and plummeting sperm counts help reduce the population. I can even add the pandemic to that plan. If you want to reduce carbon and fossil fuels, you make gas too expensive. We've already seen that one too. And then, of course, economically, you create tech stagnation. Since these big Silicon Valley companies are already multinational, so there's no real growth within the United States. So California, as a litmus test for Democrats, is an experiment in Club of Rome theory. Now, on the flip side for Republicans, Thiel argues that their curse is placing all their eggs in the basket of nihilistic negation, or beating the fist against wokeness and transgenderism. He argues that such a position may be enough for the midterms, but in the long run, there's no real legislative agenda that the GOP has laid out. You may remember in my last episode that I raised that very point with Senator Rick Scott of Florida, who has proposed a 12-point plan, but he may be one of the few. Thiel thinks that apoplectic yelling at CRT and woke companies is not going to be enough. And furthermore, affordability needs to be addressed. So if there's this mass exodus from California, is Florida a real alternative if it's not affordable for the middle class? We've seen some very expensive housing and rental prices in Florida. So Teal challenges the GOP to provide solutions to this housing affordability issue. And then in a bigger sense, he raised the issue of China with a slide that had the Man of Steel on one side and Winnie the Pooh on the other. If you create a quadrant of how to deal with China, you'd have one quadrant of being tough economically with tariffs and also militarily hawkish. That could spell World War. In another quadrant, you trade with China and then maybe bomb them, a witty version of a neocon's idea. In the third quadrant, you'd hit them with tariffs and then maybe go military if need be. That would be a Trumpian plan. And then finally, in the fourth quadrant, you have a dovish attitude both economically and militarily, which is to do nothing. That's California's plan. So how do we deal with China? Is it Man of Steel or is it Winnie the Pooh? The California idea is to try to make the Chinese become more like California. So how do we do better than that? And sadly, it seems as though California has adopted more Chinese-style policies than China has adopted California-style policies. After all, have they slowed their coal production? No, they have increased it. And who's mining all these rare earth minerals for the lithium batteries for electric cars? China. While many think that the GOP is the party of the rich, Teal argues that the GOP is the party of the middle class. Democrat policies do not favor the middle class or the hardworking. You can tell that they favor pandering to the poor as a form of Santa Claus. They reward the illegal immigrant and punish the mom and pop shop. They pass an Inflation Reduction Act while the market plunges. They talk of unity when Biden demonizes half the country. It's an upside-down philosophy. So Peter Thiel provided this excellent overview of the curse of all these groups. Unfortunately, Democrats have dug a grave in California, but they're happy to lie down in it. Make no mistake that Biden and Democrats will make abortion their number one issue in the November midterms because it's the only thing where they can attract voters. Another big keynote speaker at this conference was Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. He's far and away America's most well-known governor and the GOP's favorite governor. He's also the youngest governor at 42 years old. That's just 1 year older than I am. What he has accomplished in his time so far is remarkable. Early on in DeSantis' speech, he talked about how Florida had plus 200,000 registered Democrat voter demographic. Now, as of the latest tallies, Florida has a plus 300,000 registered Republican balance. Think about that. That's a 500,000 vote swing from negative 200,000 to plus 300,000. And that includes all those who migrated from blue states in the pandemic. To me, that indicates that DeSantis is doing something right in Florida. DeSantis used his speech to go issue by issue with various problems that he faced, such as school choice, where something like 80% of low-income kids can choose schools outside of their district. One of the major issues he faced early on was, of course, the pandemic. He stuck to his guns when he reopened Florida for business far earlier than other states did. And he explained how he had this moment of conscience where people told him and the politically correct or politically expedient thing to do might be to keep schools and businesses closed. But he thought to himself, he has to be the one to take the fall for this. It shouldn't be the business owners and the kids and the parents and the teachers.